and welcome to another edition of ISG Smartalks, the podcast where we try to educate, inform and entertain our listeners on how business is being transformed by technology in all of its many forms. Now today I'm joined by two technology experts, Manders and Shah from Wipro and Manders from ISG. Both are recognized experts in a technology that's often hyped as being the next big transformational technology that's going to disrupt industry, and that's blockchain. Now, others say it's, in fact, the questions I ask our guests at the end of the podcast, and I will ask Muneeb and Alex these questions. One of the questions I ask is which technology has promised the most but delivered the least so far, and some people say blockchain. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. We'll see where our two guests are on the blockchain debate, whether they think it's going to be transformational or whether it's a damp squib. But first off, let me ask my guests to introduce themselves. So, Muneeb, why don't we start with you? Could you just explain to our listeners who you are and how you got into the world of blockchain?
Sure. Thanks, Barry. Hello, everyone. Muneeb Shah. I'm part of Wipro's blockchain practice. I lead the blockchain initiatives for EMEA at Wipro. Interestingly enough, I started the blockchain journey quite long back when cryptocurrencies were in advent and people were still trying to explore what to do with blockchain. I come predominantly from a banking background, having worked in transaction banking, treasury, payments, and blockchain. As all of you would be aware of, incidentally started with Bitcoin, closely having something to do with payments. So got introduced to it quite early on. But then from a Wipro perspective, we started very seriously focusing on blockchain around three and a half years back. And that's when I got an opportunity to dwell more into it as a focused portfolio and been in it since then and loving it so far.
Excellent. I'll ask you a little bit more about the cryptocurrency link in a second. But Alex, what about you? How long have you been involved in blockchain?
That's a great question. It's now been several years at this point, and I got into blockchain actually after reading an article about the conceptualization of the technology within the financial services industry. And I came home from work and asked my wife if she would help me build a blockchain node, at that point otherwise known as a cryptocurrency computer, because I wanted to understand, how the hardware was assembled, how the software laid on top of it, and basically how it all contributed to this big decentralized network. From there, went on to build, almost a dozen of these machines. And then my blockchain journey has progressed along the lines of developing decentralized software applications for supply chain applications within the manufacturing space, to lecturing on the topic at the University of Texas, Austin, facilitating conversations at MIT in Massachusetts, and ultimately, I believe in the technology to the extent of having then gone to Stanford University to study supply chain underneath a individual who actually established the supply chain program at Stanford in the early '80s. And from there, it's all day, every day, and I seem to think that we're only at the beginning. So that's kind of my background and how I got involved.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. So we really do have two real experts in the world of blockchain. Now, let me start or let me just explain some context, if you like. Our listeners are from all walks of life, and some are deep expert techies, and some include my mum, who is really not a deep techie. She has promised me she's listened to all of our episodes so far. She does understand podcasting just about now. She's 80 years old, by the way. She will have absolutely no idea what blockchain means, let alone distributed ledger technology or cryptocurrency. So could one of you try and explain blockchain to my mum?
Oh, very interesting, Barry. Interestingly enough, I was just, when you started with the question and in terms of explaining it in basic layman terms, I remember an incident. I was traveling for a customer meeting, and one of the perils of the job, if I may say, is a lot of travel because of the attention blockchain is garnering all over. My daughter, she's 6 years old, my elder one. So I was packing in the evening, and she comes to me and she says, "So where are you headed?" I said, "I have to go for a meeting." And she's like, "What do you do in that meeting?" I said, "I'm going to talk about blockchain." And she's like, do you need some help? I said, how can you help me? So she goes back and brings her Legos, right? And gives me a pack of Legos and say, here are the blocks. You find out a chain and link them together, and you're done. So that moment I thought, if you realistically look at it, right, essentially that's what we are trying to do, right? So we're basically getting building blocks from an industry standpoint together, linking them up, forming a network of, these various building blocks to actually create something meaningful, right? Yeah. Now, if you look at it in a very simplistic term, a lot of people often do say, blockchain is just a database. It's just a place where you store information, right? And they're true in some sense. But what we also try to basically say then is, yes, it is a data store. You do store data, but it's not just actual data. You store hashes. But what it also does is it actually helps you bring in some elements which a simple data store cannot, right? Now, thinking about it very simplistically, if I would take an example of the advent of information sharing. So we have been sharing information since ages. Then Excel sheets came to being, and information started being shared leveraging Excel sheets. So I would compile my own Excel sheet, somebody else will compile their own Excel sheet, and then we would have to reconcile the two inputs. Very simplistically, if I think of blockchain, it's, consider it like an Excel sheet. Consider it an Excel sheet in a SharePoint. That means hosted online. With the added advantage that, it automatically reconciles all the information that's getting inputted, and also make sure that the information that's being put in cannot be deleted, cannot be tampered, cannot be updated. It can only be appended, right? I think that's my simplistic answer for what a blockchain is in very simple terms. And Alex, you might want to add on top of that.
Yeah, I think you summed it up well. And Barry, to the point of your mother, I certainly appreciate her interest in the topic, and I actually have explained this to what is now my 9-year-old daughter when she was 6 on what a blockchain was. And the easiest way that I can explain it right off the cuff here is, we build a blockchain computer, and that is what I have in my house. And there are blockchain computers in many different people's homes all around the world. And those individual computers are all pointed to a specific network. And the purpose of the computer is to secure any kind of transaction that occurs across the network. And it's as simple as that, right? We can get into the technicalities around, decentralization and consensus protocols and hashtags and all these things. But at the end of the day, it's a network of computers, whether they're virtual or hosted on physical hardware. And their sole purpose in life is to secure transactions that occur across the network. Very similar to what we know as the World Wide Web of information. Blockchain network is pretty much the evolution of the World Wide Web version 1, and that being World Wide Web version 2, the Internet of Value. So now we're able to transact value across a new generation of the Internet with a whole support system of networks or computers that are sitting in my home or Barry's home or somewhere in Indochina. So that would kind of be my perspective on a very simple way of doing this. I've also explained it with sugar packets, but unfortunately, Barry, I can't do that on a podcast.
No problem. I think you've both done a very good job. I'll test my mum over a cup of tea after she listens to it and see whether she understands blockchain or not. And I'm not sure she listens because she's interested in the technology, but she just likes to hear her son's voice, I think, coming across the radio. But I think the key is, for me, is this distributed or decentralized nature of blockchain. So rather than having a central master, a database of data which holds the record, it's distributed around the world, as you say, on these different computers. And once data is stored on the blockchain, it can't be changed, right? It's irrefutable. All of the other links in the chain have to change, and so you get a very, very high level of security, is my understanding, of trust, traceability, and transparency for data that's stored on a blockchain. And it's this distributed ledger technology that made me realize how much potential blockchain had, because I first heard about it many years ago, as many people probably did, associated with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And I thought, oh, that's quite interesting. I can understand how that's potentially very disruptive to the world of, foreign exchange and currency. But, what's it got to do with my industry, with sort of sourcing and global business and supply chains? And then I realized the distributed ledger technology and the technology that underpins Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is blockchain. And then you realize that it's got really big implications on different industries. And then I had that light bulb moment and thought, wow, this could be really, really game changing. So maybe could one of you have a stab at the link between cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, and then blockchain and distributed ledger technology? Am I right in thinking the cryptocurrency world came first, and then experts like yourselves realized the potential for distributed ledger technology on supply chains?
So, Barry, distributed ledger technology by itself has been existing quite a number of years back, right? So I think if not earlier, at least mid 80s or early 80s or late 80s, somewhere that time frame, DLT was already in purview, right? The concept of decentralization was already there. Yeah. So from a technology perspective, it's not something which is new or which just came about today. How it came to prominence was, of course, with the advent of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, right? Which basically used the inherent elements of a distributed ledger technology, the elements of cryptography, right, which effectively is the art or science of hidden, thus making these transactions extremely secure and tamper-proof. Now, cryptocurrency or Bitcoin is a one-off use case on the DLT broadly. Often, we do hear it in the context of Bitcoin and blockchains being synonymous, but we have to be very conscious to be able to segregate the two. Bitcoin runs on a blockchain or a DLT, and is just a one-off use case on it.
Yeah.
Right? Now, with respect to the element that you brought about it being secure, tamper-proof, absolutely yes. But the whole concept of Bitcoin coming into purview, or for that matter, blockchain gaining prominence, has predominantly been about disintermediation, or it's been about establishing trust in a trustless ecosystem. I think that's where it essentially all started, in my view.
Yeah. Okay. And the one area I've never really understood, and Alex, maybe you can help me here, is that I've come across the concept of blockchain mining, and I've never really, if I'm honest, I might try and blag my way through it at a dinner party, but I really don't understand blockchain mining. So can you try to sort of bring that to life for me? What's that all about?
Yeah, so let me try to explain Bitcoin or blockchain mining, and I want to address the prior question as well. So, where we spend a lot of time trying to communicate the value of blockchains and the applications of blockchains is really trying to segregate the cryptocurrency use case from the enterprise use case. And the way I typically explain it, I have several ways, but one of which is a train card. So like if you've all ridden on a train, and that train has a set of tracks below it. So we think about a blockchain as a train track. We can have multiple train tracks facilitating the transactions of many trains or transportation of cargo, et cetera. So I think that, when we talk about Bitcoin is a application on the Bitcoin blockchain specifically. We have other blockchains like Ethereum. The Ethereum network is a very large decentralized blockchain system, and on top of that specific network, you can build different kinds of applications. So we can build smart contracting applications. Of course, we can build cryptocurrency applications. We can build gaming applications. And so when we think about what is a blockchain, it is a network, and on top of a network, you can build applications. Bitcoin or cryptocurrency are, in their purest form, an application that is designed to sit on top of a network, regardless of the network. And so when we think about, your question, Barry, mining, so mining is literally the process of contributing a pool of resources to secure a network. So when we think about, the machines that I have in my own home, they happen to be Ethereum decentralized nodes. So we secure the Ethereum network. And as a result of securing the network through providing resources such as power or server or storage, whatever you want to consider the resource, if our computer contributes to solving a very complex math problem, then we get rewarded with a fraction of a cryptocurrency or Ether token. And so basically mining is fundamentally just a computer that is contributing resources to a broader network, and in exchange for those resources get rewarded with a token or a fraction of a token. And that's kind of the old way of the world as well. We're now moving into these decentralized cloud-based blockchain networks that don't necessarily require the computers that I have in my home, right? And so we're trying to get to this more energy efficient way of leveraging blockchain technology, more virtual as opposed to having the big, heavy computer that I have. We're trying to get much better with the use of the hardware and software.
I get it now. That's a great explanation. Thank you very much. Now we talked about use cases, sort of industry use cases are built on the blockchain, which makes me think about which industries do you think are going to be most disrupted by blockchain? I've seen a few examples in shipping, which for obvious reasons, with Maersk and IBM have had a sort of pilot out for quite a long time, and I've heard examples from Walmart and retail, and there are some in financial services. But let me ask you, Muneeb, which industries are you seeing benefiting from blockchain right now, and can you sort of give us some examples of how it's being used?
Sure, Barry. So, Barry, before I answer that question, just to step back onto the mining question earlier, to which Alex was also eliciting to. I think one point that we fundamentally want our audience to know today is that mining is aptly relevant only from the perspective of an open public blockchain, like a Bitcoin or a pure vanilla Ethereum blockchain, to what Alex was pointing out earlier. In an enterprise context, we often do tend to use permissioned blockchain networks where mining is not relevant at all. Hence, permissioned blockchain networks are not compute intensive. The reason I'm bringing this up is because most of the people that you talk to sometimes do tend to say, Bitcoin mining is a compute intensive process. The return of investment with respect to the amount of utilities consumed to be able to mine a transaction is not worth it. So it's very important to note that what we do from enterprise context perspective, mining is not involved. We can actually form more efficient lean systems. Now, in terms of the industry adoption, right? So what we have seen traditionally over the last few years is that banking and financial services has been a front runner in terms of trying to embrace blockchain and DLT with various use cases, which also means that they've done a lot of POCs, a lot of pilots in that space. Not necessarily all of them have moved into a full-fledged production manifestation, right? Except, maybe for the exception of trade finance, which has seen some good adoption, at least in a production scenario. So I would say personally, basis my experience of what I've seen in the industry, and as Alex was also pointing out earlier, I think supply chain manufacturing is a very good candidate from a blockchain perspective in terms of getting a good value and ROI for what you are investing in. And we have seen some relative good adoption there. Apart from that, energy and utilities has been the front runner, for me, in terms of embracing blockchain to either bring about a commodity trading platform where you can trade a commodity like crude oil, or to bring about a blockchain platform to be able to trade and tokenize renewable energy. Or for that matter, decentralized grids, demand-side response, certificate of origin from energy perspective. So we have seen these meaningful use cases, not just at a concept level, but actually getting implemented in the industry. So I would say the front runners from all the industries for me have been energy and utilities and manufacturing to a certain extent. And manufacturing, it's not just manufacturing. I would also club healthcare with it from a supply chain perspective, right? So I would say supply chain is a good use case. And all industries like manufacturing, healthcare, etc., have been part to it. Banking and financial services, a lot of POCs, but not many production implementations.
Yeah, and let me thank you for that, and let me ask Alex for his perspective as well, because I often think with blockchain, it's a bit like teenagers and sex. There's a lot of talk, but not a lot of action. There's lots of proof of concept, but there's not a lot of action taking place. Now, I may be wrong with that, of course, but Alex, what's your perspective? Are we really seeing it become transformative to industries now? And if so, which ones? Or are we still just doing more talking than actually deploying?
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question, Barry. And from our perspective, at least here in the Americas, and based on our research, we as a firm are actively covering roughly 80 different global consortia. So we're starting to, we continue to have advantages in terms of understanding what markets are moving in which direction and the types of use cases being, created or supported. Now, I say that because at least from where I see the most traction being made, it's in areas where there is a regulation or a requirement. And I also begin to separate use case from business process. In my mind, supply chain is a business process that is cross-industry. And so when I look at an industry such as food and beverage or pharmaceutical, here in the Americas, we have, federal legislation that is driving mandates in the pharmaceutical supply chain to track and trace the origin of manufactured prescription medicine to the point of distribution at any type of retail dispensary, whether it's Walmart or hospital. So because we have regulation driving this, there are consortia that are being developed around the regulation. There are software companies being born out of the regulation, and we are seeing alignment from your GlaxoSmithKlines to your AmerisourceBergens all the way to your Walmart, right? So pharmaceutical to me is a very key industry to keep an eye on. The other one that I'm also very passionate about is food and beverage. In fact, last month I gave a public statement to the federal government in Washington, D.C. on the use of blockchain in the food and beverage supply chain. Also, again, we have federal laws that are being passed to effectively make these organizations within the supply chain be accountable for the track and trace of food product from the point of it being harvested to the point of Alex buying it at a Whole Foods in Austin, Texas. And, and from my perspective, the food and beverage industry and the pharmaceutical industries are clearly the up and coming emerging industries to watch. And of course, supply chain as a business process, it flows through both of those industries, which impacts a harvester or a logistics company, a transport company, an air freight company, a retailer, a CPG company. So we have to begin to think about, if we're going to say supply chain, what does a supply chain look like across an industry? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, they all intersect, right? Yeah. And so that's some of the thinking that I spend quite a bit of time on. The oil and gas industry, they have a consortia. The oil and gas folks are trying to figure it out, your Shells, your Exxons, et cetera. They're here in Houston, Texas, just down the road from me. And I do go and collaborate with them. They've got probably a half a dozen pretty good POCs within that industry, but they're still trying to figure it out, right? They're a little bit more risk adverse, but I think that now they understand that it's not Bitcoin. They will begin making more investments, which will probably in the next 2 to 3 years bring the oil and gas industry up behind the food and beverage and pharma industries. But right now, there's no regulation or requirement for oil and gas to even make the investment, right?
Yeah. So, no, great answers. Thank you very much. My understanding is that if let's take one of those examples. Let's say food and beverage, which most of us can understand. So if you say food and a product or goes from farm, let's say, all the way through a complex supply chain, regulated to your plate and us, having dinner, and you should be able to track almost the ingredients of that food from where it was produced to how it's ended up on your plate through wholesale and retail. Now, presumably every player in that supply chain has to be using a blockchain for you to be able to, let's say, benefit from, let's say it's a product recall. There's some element of the ingredients of the food there's something wrong with. And so you're a food distributor and you want to be able to recall all those bits. Now, if everybody in the supply chain was not on the same blockchain, would that still be able to work? What happens if not everybody in the supply chain plays on the same blockchain?
Yeah. So again, fantastic question. And the short answer is yes. The participants within a supply chain across the food industry, whether it's let's just use lettuce as an example. That happens to be a pretty popular instance that occurred last November here around Thanksgiving. There was an issue with lettuce, and they effectively pull off all the lettuce from all the shelves. So it's 2 days before Thanksgiving, and none of us can get lettuce, right? So the challenge there is that now we have a ton of food waste, right? We overreacted for the benefit of consumer safety, and now we have a shortage of products. We have excess capacity on shelf space, and we don't really know where the problem is. And, in order to track the source of the problem, everyone in a specific, from the harvester of the lettuce all the way to the distributor of the lettuce and the retailer of the lettuce have to, and sometimes with IoT smart connected devices, log the transaction into a blockchain application, right? And so now, as long as each of those participants are logging data into that blockchain application, then we can quickly hit a button and recall the lettuce from a specific area where it was grown, or from a specific set of trucks that lettuce might have been transported on. Now, the other part of that question that you asked is, do they all need to be a part of the same blockchain or blockchain application? Where we are advancing, and there are advances that occur daily on this stuff, is that we're quickly getting to the point of cross-chain interoperability. And basically what that means is I could contribute data to an application that is run by IBM, but then somebody else could be able to contribute information to a blockchain application facilitated by SAP. Cross-chain interoperability means that SAP now talk to IBM, and we're able to uplift the constraint of participating in one specific blockchain or one specific blockchain network. And so cross-chain interoperability basically means the connectivity of multiple networks through different types of applications. That's where we're heading. So, Barry, I know I kind of went off there in a few directions, but I want to just maybe stop for a second and see if I hit the question or if there's a follow-up.
I think you absolutely answered my question. I think it's the interoperability between different blockchains that would enable that. So effectively, they don't need to be part of the same blockchain, because you would be able to transfer data from one to the other. So thank you for that. The other question I think our listeners will be interested in, and maybe Muneeb, you could have a go at this, is what does the future hold? What do you imagine blockchains that federal or public sector governments will be using for tax or for immigration, or could you imagine education authorities using it for exams, or do you imagine industry-wide blockchains or individual blockchains for companies? What do you think the future might look like?
So when we look at interoperability per se, there are two ways of looking at it. One is, can one blockchain network interact with another blockchain network? Absolutely yes. Fairly easy using standard API calls. All the blockchains by themselves are enabled with standard SDK APIs, which can interact with an external world. And that could be another blockchain. That could be your backend SAP systems or your Oracle systems or whatnot. But the question is that we have to move onwards from there on. When we talk about interoperability, it's now about the atomicity of transactions. Can you maintain the same state of transactions in two different blockchains, if I put it very simply? And which also means, can we have a high degree of interoperability with respect to, the same code base or the same smart contract being deployed across two blockchains if need be? So the answer is yes, we are moving towards that. And I think there is a high degree of interoperability being achieved in both these remits, as Alex also pointed out. Now, with respect to what blockchain holds from a transformational standpoint, I have always pitched blockchain as an enabler for a broader transformational journey, right? It's not about pitching blockchain as just another technology, by which you try to do the same thing the same way you were doing before. It doesn't add any value. So the essence here is for us to look at where exactly does it add value, and can it be a key enabler to your broader transformation. I don't want to use the term digital transformation, because it's a much wider gamut, but to your broader transformational journey from a business process standpoint. In that remit, I believe we are already making some great headway. Alex mentioned some consortia which have been formed. There are a lot of consortia which have been formed here in Europe as well, which are actually implementing these projects in production with regulators on board. Educational institutions, for example, as you mentioned, would greatly benefit from it if you want to basically have a data store of your credentials or certificates, which can be vetted across unanimously without any iota of doubt. Government bodies like the United Nations High Commission for Refugees is actively seeking solutions on blockchain, wherein they want to maintain, the credentials of refugees across the globe in a central notarized mechanism by which authorized parties can access and view that data, not necessarily having to rely on physical data, right, or physical transcripts or university certificates, for example. Central banks have been increasingly looking at it. We have seen projects in Singapore, Project Ubin. As Wipro, we have been involved in a Central Bank of Thailand project on central bank digital currencies. It's called Project Intanon. Great uptake there. South African Reserve Bank has recently released RFI, for exploring central bank digital currencies as well on DLT. So yes, regulators are exploring it. Governments are exploring it. Some city councils as well have started exploring it more from an energy perspective. That can they actually bring about some decentralization and create these microgrids which can feed back to the national grid, and also setting up charging infrastructures for EV vehicles, for example. So the short answer is yes. I think it has a great potential to transform the way we are doing things today, and we are heading towards that.
Excellent, thank you. And let me I'm going to ask my final question before I ask you my 5 questions that I ask all of my guests. But final question to Alex. Then I think, what do you think over the next 5 years, Alex? Do you think it's going to really take off? It sounds like it has already. And will we be able to overcome some of the challenges? Because I'd always had an assumption there was a challenge that it was very energy inefficient, and that's been a bit of a blocker. Are we able to overcome that, or in fact, is that actually accurate? What's your view?
Yeah, I don't think it's an issue of energy consumption anymore. I think Muneeb explained that earlier, where it's the use at the enterprise level is not necessarily reliant upon these big clunky blockchain cryptocurrency miners, right? So I do think over the next 5 years that there will be adoption that scales out within specific industries, right? Like when we think about the whole concept of smarter food and safer food and food value chains, and we know that we have regulation that's being passed and laws are being changed to ensure that consumers are safer and that we can replenish and create more options for, folks like us at the grocery store and reduce food waste. That they're going to be the pioneer. They're going to come up with all kinds of different smart contracting applications. They're going to shape new business models. They're going to develop new governance frameworks, right? And they will ultimately, be distributed to other industries such as insurance. When we think about new consumer products, we always, at least from my perspective, think about blockchain from the end consumer. Why am I paying insurance on my car right now that's parked in a garage? Well, with a blockchain and a smart connected device, are we able to essentially give me a variable insurance premium on my car while driving it versus when it's parked? So I do think that over the next several years, there will be more emphasis on the end consumer as it relates to value creation through the form of new products and safety. And then we'll underpin that in some cases with blockchain technology. I don't think we're going to get to wide scale mass adoption with the technology over the next 3 years per se, but I do think the market is becoming more educated. It's refreshing now to see that I can walk into an enterprise organization and not be asked, hey, what's Bitcoin? Right? It's a different conversation than it was 3 years ago, and it'll be a different conversation 3 years from now. So that's kind of where, I see this unfolding over the next couple of years. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, guys, I'm going to turn the questions now onto some more personal questions. I always ask my guests 5 questions, as you know. And in fact, I was at dinner with a group of clients about 2 weeks ago now, and one of them had been listening to our podcast, and he said, "Oh, can you ask the table your 5 questions?" And so we went around the table and did our 5 questions. It made for a very interesting and enjoyable evening with a glass of wine. So I'm going to assume you've got a glass of wine in your hand, although it might be a bit early for you, Alex. But so let me start with the first question. Let me ask you first, Muneeb, and then we'll come on to Alex. But which technology has had the biggest impact on your career so far, Muneeb?
Honestly speaking, I think it's blockchain, right? The biggest impact on my career.
I thought you might say that.
Yes. But then I would say if you look at from a process standpoint, the biggest impact which I see is, changing day in and day out is payments and remittances. That underpins, various technologies, and blockchain is one of them. From a technology perspective, I would definitely say blockchain.
Okay, excellent. And Alex, you may well have the same answer, but is there a technology other than blockchain, or is it blockchain that's had the biggest impact on your career so far?
Well, I would say holistically, my career is probably email, right? Yeah. I can't get anything done. I've never been able to get anything done without email, and it's been around 20 years or more, probably a lot more than that, right?
Imagine a life without email. Yeah, I can't even imagine it.
Right, or text messaging now, which really wasn't mainstream 15 years ago. So yeah, I mean that would kind of be my short answer. But of course, blockchain is my passion from a current state emerging technology perspective, and that's in part because I do believe that it will help advance IoT and AI and cognitive thinking as well. Yeah. So there you go, Barry.
Excellent, thank you. Second question: which technology has promised most and delivered least in your experience? And as I said earlier in this podcast, some of my previous guests have actually have had blockchain as their answer to this question. So, is there a technology that's been a damp squib, that's promised such a lot, and you were really excited, and then it's not delivered much? Let me go to you first, Muneeb, again.
I think in that remit, I would say RPA, in my view, right? It promised quite a bit. In my view, it has not delivered as it should have. Having said that, while I'm a big proponent of blockchain, but looking at it very pragmatically and realistically, blockchain also has not yet proven its worth as it should have. But I strongly believe it has the potential to do it. It has started doing that, and in the next 3 to 4 years, as Alex also pointed out, we'll see it actually transforming the world.
Yeah, I think you're right. Interesting answer. I think, I know what you mean with RPA. It promised so much, and arguably it is now really delivering across many organizations. But I still think it's got a long way to go. So no, good answer, Alex. Same question to you.
Yeah, that's kind of a tough one, and I'm going to probably get a hand slap for this one, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say artificial intelligence. I've been reading about AI for years. Of course, we know that there are advanced AI technologies and applications in the market, but when we boil it down to like everyday consumer behavior or buying patterns or just how you and I interact, I don't even know where, if at all, I come across AI. So I do think that the technology of AI will continue to emerge as we set frameworks to support cognitive and predictive analytics and artificial intelligence. But I just don't think we're there yet. It's almost 2020, and it's not Blade Runner, right? Like the old movie from the 80s. But that's certainly not the poo-poo on the technology. I think it absolutely will get there at some point.
I think it's a very much overused term, and I think if you break AI down, there's huge strides in some of the machine learning technology, for example. Or I was forwarded somebody a link I saw earlier on Twitter of deep fake and a Boris Johnson video, which is of course not Boris Johnson, been created entirely by AI, and you think, wow, I mean it's just incredible. It's so lifelike. And so there are applications, but I totally get your point. The actual generic AI maybe not delivering what we thought it would when we first watched those sci-fi films many years ago. Okay, let me move on to the third question. Is there a gadget that you use every day that has changed your life? I'm a real gadget freak, so I have lots and lots of different gadgets. Most of them just gather dust in my man cave at home, but I love a good gadget. So Muneeb, let me go to you first again. Is there a gadget that you use every day?
Yes, and interestingly enough, Barry, the definition of a gadget has kind of redefined itself for me. Yeah. I would consider my car now as a gadget for me, especially with the self-driving autonomous capabilities enabled by AI and the plethora of features it has on the touch of a button.
Do you drive a Tesla by any chance?
I drive something very close to Tesla. It's a Volvo S90, which is,
Okay.
ironically considered next best to Tesla in terms of autonomous driving. But yes,
Yeah.
I'm loving it for now.
Yeah. Excellent. No, good answer. Alex, same for you. Is there a gadget you use?
Uh, I'm going to give you like the lo-fi version of this one, Barry, because because I'm involved so much with technology when I'm at home, my favorite quote unquote gadget would be like my smoker. I have like a barbecue smoker, a big ceramic thing that you cook meat in. Very
Yeah.
lo-fi, but also very scientific in just temperature and different kind of food and spices and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
so I would say, I mean, I use that thing probably 4 or 5 times a week
Oh, wow.
on average, and it's just kind of a way for me to release my brain from a cell
Yeah.
phone and do something a little bit more lo-fi.
Yeah. Good answer. I have a new one as of last week. It was my birthday last week, and my wife bought me a Peloton, which is relatively new to the UK. I know they've been in the US for quite a long time, but one of these spinning bikes that's linked to the cloud, and you have live and recorded videos, which are sort of completely immersive. And we are both completely hooked. I love the fusion of physical exercise and digital technology, and I think Peloton have nailed it. I think it's such a great gadget. So,
Very cool.
my penultimate question: which technology is going to have the biggest impact on business over the next decade? And again, I may not be surprised with your answers, but Alex, let me go to you first this time.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of teed me up on that one. I mean, of course, I'm going to say blockchain, and I'm going to say it within the context of the supply chain, just the way that data flows between supply chain partners. If we look at old EDI systems and some of the just old ways of working with technology in the supply chain and business processes, I think that because supply chain is such a fundamental backbone of the enterprise, that it will be disrupted, and blockchain will be a key enabler of that. Everything from financial transactions in the supply chain to shipping and receipt, accounting treatments, contracts, the way they're written, the way they're executed against. So in 10 years, I think that with pioneers such as your Walmarts and your IBMs and your food and your US FDA and some of these other big bodies that are pushing this, it will, over the next decade, begin to disrupt what we know as some of the current state business processes.
Excellent. And same question for you, Muneeb.
Right. So, Barry, I don't think it'll be one technology, right, which would be the key front runner in this case. I believe it'll be a combination of technologies which will lead us to a meaningful transformation in the near future. Blockchain alone by itself, would probably only be 25% to 30% of the whole pie. It has to work in conjunction with something like IoT, what it's doing today, by the way, in parlance of supply chain, for example. But then AI, right, in combination with blockchain, 5G, in combination with blockchain and IoT, are going to be the key enablers, in my view. And, interestingly enough, as much as we would think that these new emerging technology stacks are the way forward, our core systems, say, for example, from a banking perspective, are still running on decades-old mainframes, and they're not going to change in the next 10 years, very unlikely. So it'll be a combination of this legacy enabled by 5G, blockchain, AI, IoT, robotics, all coming together to deliver.
Yep. Yeah, orchestrating and stitching all of these technologies together. I totally agree with you.
Yep, I agree with him as well. I would 100% agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, final question, guys. Is there somebody in your life so far associated with technology who's been a sort of mentor or a hero? I call it a technology hero. Somebody who's had a big impact on your career to date, either somebody in the public eye or somebody personally. And anyone spring to mind? Let me start with you first, Alex.
Yeah, actually, I think this goes way back, but my mom just retired as a registered nurse recently, and back in the late 80s, early 90s, she taught me how to build a computer, and she had never done it before. So I remember using like the blue screen MS-DOS prompts to log into a computer. And then she, at one point, took me to a Windows release party in Columbus, Ohio, back when Windows was like pretty much brand new. So I've always looked up to her for that, because she's the one that introduced me to technology when I was 9 or 10. Dial-up CD-ROMs and internet phone connections and all that, and it's always stuck with me. In fact, I taught her how to build a blockchain computer a few years ago.
Your mum sounds very different to my mum, and explaining blockchain to your mum and my mum would be very different. But that's a great answer.
All right.
And then the same question for you, Muneeb.
Right, and I think you wouldn't be surprised, Barry, if I say my hero is Satoshi Nakamoto. But I'm just kidding. No, he's not. Right. So I think, from my inception into the world of information technology and engineering was more of a coincidence, to be honest. I always wanted to be in the science of, in the medical sciences field, wanted to be a doctor. And somehow there was this, one family friend who kind of opened my eyes to the world of IT and showed me the art of possible. And that's where I changed my mind and moved away from medicine and thought of, let's do engineering and let's do computer sciences and move ahead. So I still consider that as a, defining moment in my life, because it changed the course of where I was headed. Beyond that, in today's parlance, I would think, one of the key challenges who really makes me introspect and understand the value of what I'm trying to do, very specifically with respect to blockchain and AI, is my wife. She's a doctor. So we keep on discussing, right, how can I make a job redundant, basically by AI and blockchain in certain cases. She's not too pleased to hear that. So we keep on having good, stimulating discussions about that. And interestingly, she also believes that AI has the power to radically transform what they are doing. So that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So listen, guys, thank you ever so much for joining me in a discussion on blockchain. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. I've been informed and entertained. So hopefully our listeners have too. So just want to say a big thank you to Muneeb Shah from Wipro and Alex Manders from ISG. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Barry.
Fantastic. Thank you, Barry.